All right, welcome everyone. We have two wonderful speakers here today, Stacy Lee and Ted Lempert. Uh, I'm making sure I'm saying both of those right. Uh, Ted is president of Children Now, a California-based research and policy organization that is focused on transforming children's advocacy. Children Now coordinates the children's movement of California with over 6,200 organizational members. Mr. Lempert is also a lecturer in the political science department at UC Berkeley. Previously, Mr. Lempert was the CEO and co-founder of EdVoice, a California education reform organization. He was the California State Assembly member for 4 terms, representing Silicon Valley, and he served as chairs of the Assembly Higher Education Committee and select committees of the Education Technology, and co-chair of the Joint Committee to develop a master plan for education. Mr. Lempert also served on the San Mateo County Board of Supervisors and the San Mateo County Board of Education. Prior to holding public office, Mr. Lempert was special counsel and associate for the law firm Shepherd Mullen Richer in Hampton. Mr. Lempert graduated from Princeton University School of Public and International Affairs and earned his law degree from Stanford University. Sorry for the potential background noise from me. Um, and Stacy. Uh, Stacy Lee is the Chief Learning Officer and Senior Management Director for Early Childhood at Children Now, where she leads statewide strategy to advance equitable systems for young children and families. With more than 250 years' experience, she has driven impactful policy and advocacy efforts and built strong cross-sector partnerships to establish new programs such as CalWorks home visiting program and expand meaningful investment in childcare. Um, so without further ado, that's them. Gabino, you joined. Did you have anything you wanted to add before we begin?
No, you've said it all. Thank you. I got stuck in traffic, so I was a little late getting on.
No worries, no worries. Well, Ted, Stacy, we'll pull up your. Would you like to begin with anything, or would you like us to pull up your presentation immediately?
You can go pull it up now. That's fine.
Okay, perfect. I'll pull that up right now.
And while you're doing that, should we just go ahead and get started? Or
Yeah, you're go ahead. You're good to go ahead and get started. I'll get it pulled up just
great.
momentarily.
Well, first of all, it's a real honor to be here today. Thank you. We've really enjoyed working with the Ventura County Community Foundation. I want to do a special shout out to Dr. Gravino, who I know we've had some great conversations. It's been real help to us. And just thank you for all your work in the community, but especially for kids, and especially for kids at the earliest ages. Children Now is prenatal to age 26. So we work on a range of issues and early childhood, but also in TK to 12, higher ed, child welfare, kids' health. And while we deal with kids all the way up to age 26, we know that the most impactful time to really make sure we're getting all the supports for a kid is those earliest years. And so the biggest part of our agenda is in the early years, and just want to thank all of you for all the work you're doing, not just locally, but it makes a difference statewide and even nationally, in terms of promoting supports for kids in the early years. And why we're living in a very difficult time. We can talk about that more. What keeps me going is the progress we're making, that just the deep devotion I see in community after community across California, and also just how far we've come in early childhood. I remember 15, 20 years ago when it really wasn't a big issue. And now it's a big issue that everyone's talking about. And now we need to make sure we move that talk to action. So just the next slide, I think many of you are familiar with Children Now, and Aiden mentioned this. Let me know if you're able to move to the next slide. But yep, that just one of the key. Oh, the one before that. It doesn't matter. You can leave it on here. Yep, perfect. The children's movement. Just we are set up into 4 areas. Early childhood's the largest, and we work on a range of issues. We do a lot of policy development. We do work in over 80 coalitions around the state. We have a fantastic government relations operation, not just our folks in Sacramento, but folks like Stacy and I who aren't in Sacramento every day, but are very connected. And that's really important because, we like to say that there's nothing more important than kids, and kids deserve the best advocacy. And we know other interests have really strong government relations. And we say, well, children should have not only great government relations, but the best government relations. And we truly have an incredible team that gets the governor's attention, legislators' attention, agency officials' attention. And we also do a lot of work locally with county boards of supervisors and school districts throughout the state. But the thing I wanted to highlight is the children's movement, which is something that's truly unique at Children Now. And that is Children Now never does anything alone. And we realize that in all the issues we push, there's a lot of support for kids. And so we have the children's movement. If you're in an organization that is not already a member, please sign up. We have over 6,250 organizations already. And that includes large nonprofits, small nonprofits, businesses, community groups, you name it. Signing up is about the simplest thing you can do. All you're saying is you want kids prioritized in public policy. That's it. It's free. You're a member of the movement. You get all our updates, and you get the opportunity to join hundreds of other groups in different advocacy efforts. And it literally just takes a couple clicks. And so just one example of that is the next slide. A couple of years ago, we were told by folks in Sacramento that it was a tough budget year. There's no way you're going to get more money for childcare. And I should say Stacy, about to turn it over to Stacy, was like, don't tell me no when it comes to childcare and kids. That I don't accept that. So we were like, we're going to do this. And we pushed hard for support for childcare. And so we got to get support, not only to open up more slots, but to support our childcare workforce, which is primarily women of color. And as you know, severely underpaid. And so we made a huge push. And it wasn't just Children Now, it was over 1,100 organizations coming together, a wide diversity of organizations. And what got a lot of media attention, although every organization that signed on is important, is that SEIU, obviously the major labor organization, and the State Chamber of Commerce, the largest business organization, signed on to the letter. And that's important, one, because those two organizations don't usually sign on to other people's letters. They just do their own thing. And the second thing is, like, how often does SEIU and the Chamber, do business and labor come together? And it just shows that when it comes to kids, we can bring people together. Kids can be a unifying issue in these really difficult times. And so it would love showing this children's movement. And we sent all these logos. And after Sacramento told us no way, we actually got well over $1 billion in new funding in the state budget because of this concentrated push. So that's just a very quick overview of who we are at Children Now. But the best part about Children Now is our team. We have some incredible leaders. I like to say that our top leaders could easily be running another organization, and Stacy is certainly an example of that. She has incredible experience as a senior leader at First 5 LA, at Children Now, other organizations. Stacy, I saw someone at a conference yesterday who was one of your fellow student leaders at UCLA. So Stacy's been a major leader in policy and activism since her college days, and she does a brilliant job leading our early childhood work at Children Now. So the good news for you is you don't have to hear from me anymore. You get to hear from Stacy, so I'll turn it over to her.
Thanks, Ted. Can we go to the next slide? It's really good to be here again. I see some familiar faces from when we presented maybe a year or two ago. And you might see some slides that are familiar. And, given that you all are experts in early childhood and so deeply committed to childcare, I'm not going to share a lot of news that is necessarily new or unusual to you. But my hope is that it might bring to light some framing or data or talking points that are useful in your activities as advocates and organizers to support and build your efforts here in your community and statewide. As Ted said, Children Now works on a variety of issue areas across education, health, and child welfare. And within each of those teams, we have focused work on early childhood. And so we collaborate, the early childhood team collaborates with staff across the organization. And I always say, like, if we have conflict internally at Children Now and we can figure it out, it helps us build better policies that work in the real world. So we like to have robust conversations internally about how to build good policy for kids in California. If you go to the next slide, many of us, you can tap again. There you go. So many of us have heard bits and pieces of this research over the last 20 years. A lot of it is very new. Neuroscience is a relatively new area that is making discoveries daily. And so we're all trying to keep up with it. And what I think is really important is sort of the connection between these different findings that we've learned, right? So we talk a lot about the early childhood years as, really important in terms of brain development. A million neural connections every second. That can feel overwhelming to families and parents and saying, what am I supposed to do? Am I supposed to constantly stimulate this child? And it's not necessarily that. I mean, you obviously want to give them enriching experiences, but it really is making sure they have a stable, positive environment. And that is what supports healthy brain development. It's the architecture of the brain that's impacted by unhealthy or toxic experiences, right? So instability, lack of predictability, someone not responding to their needs, that can create an unhealthy brain architecture that later can express itself in, relatively quickly in behavioral challenges and other health issues for the child as they develop. And so we really talk about the importance of stability, connections with adults who care about them and who can support their healthy development. If you move to the next slide. And it shows up physically, right? Like it literally alters the brain of the child in terms of their neural connections. Kids who experience continued exposure to childhood trauma and toxic stress have neurons that look different. And while those can be rebuilt, like we talked about, it is the architecture that overall can be harmed. And we really want to make sure that this precious window of time is supported by giving children the best experience that they can in the early years. And that really means supporting their families and parents to have stability and support while they are pregnant and have young kids at home, and then onward from there. Next slide. You all should be greatly familiar with the work of James Heckman. He's a Nobel laureate economist, and he's one of the early adopters of focusing on early childhood supports and systems, and found that the earlier you invest in families and children, the greater the return. If you think about how our systems invest, it's pretty much the opposite of this, right? We pour more money late in the later years to respond to crisis. And we really, part of the difficulty of our job is sort of turning around the tanker ship and saying we need to redirect resources and investments for the earlier years to make the best impact. And that'll benefit all of us all the way down through, high education, college, and career entry. Next slide. One of the things that's been really important to convey is, Ted talked about the multi-billion-dollar increase we got in 23 to help raise pay primarily and pay for keep the system afloat while we create a new cost-based model for childcare. And sometimes you'll hear policymakers in Sacramento say like, "Oh my God, we've given you so much," and you're like, "You have given us a lot recently," but it belies the Grand Canyon of need that exists in our state. And so since the Great Recession in 2007 to 2009, capacity was slashed. We had over $1 billion in cuts. And we recently only recovered that loss in dollars, but we haven't reestablished the capacity. And again, that was not a great starting point. We weren't serving the majority of families at that point. So that should not be the bar at which we measure things. We need to, and the world has changed dramatically, right? In terms of people's ability to afford care, people's need to work more to be able to afford housing and all the other things. Life has changed a lot. And so it's really important to help convey to elected officials the overarching need of the majority of families in California for some support to be able to access good quality care for their kids. Next page. Okay, next. Oh, so you can click one more time. So many of you have heard the statistic. It was about 14% of children who are eligible for subsidized care receive subsidy. It was updated this year and it's 16%. And that reflects the hard work of all of us in the field advocating for increased capacity. You hear the governor talk a lot about the commitment to 200,000 slots. We know they haven't fulfilled that commitment. They're very short. They're about 70, I think, something thousand slots short of that 200,000. It's still a substantial increase, but it's only 2% more, right? And then if we zoom out and think, well, 39% of kids are eligible, when you don't serve those eligible families, you deepen inequities because the majority of the kids who are eligible are disproportionately Black and Latino and kids of color, right? People in different circumstances that face barriers. So it's really important we think about the bigger picture. And then as you'll see from the data I show later, really the eligibility number shouldn't even be our goal mark because most families need support to access care because it's become so unaffordable and the costs have just gone up so tremendously. Next slide. Something just to think about is just the money that we already put into the system. So there's about $5 billion that goes into the preschool system that includes state preschool and TK. And then on the other side, on childcare, if you click one more time, something that's very important that often gets forgotten is that there's an additional $1.7 billion that the federal government puts directly to providers for Head Start and Early Head Start. We have to look at the whole universe of the system and figure out how we can best support and leverage the whole system. The state often forgets about the money that goes to Head Start and Early Head Start because they don't administer those programs. But we know that that's one of the best programs that serves families, particularly who are low income, and is comprehensive in the supports they provide and should be a model for the type of care that is provided throughout the state. And then we need to figure out how to, make these funds work most effectively to reach the most families in addition to new resources. The next slide. Other things to note is just things have changed for families who have infants and toddlers, right? There's not enough childcare. We all know that. Most families with children and infants have at least one parent working full time. Most have a working mother, right? Because the assumption typically is that the mom will take care of the child, whether they're working or not. Most kids live in a childcare desert, and infant and toddler slots are only a fraction of available care. So one of the realities is that families have to figure things out on their own. They're patchworking care, they're using informal care, they have a fragile system that they set up to be able to work and care for their children. And that, again, if you think about the brain science slide, is not providing families or the caregivers and the child stability, which can lead to additional stress in their life. Next slide. The next thing that we talk a lot about is just how much the world has changed, like in terms of costs. And I talk a lot about how costs have gone up, right? We all know this. We feel it daily. It keeps happening for a variety of reasons. But one analysis said that you have to earn 256,000, rounded to seven, $257,000 to comfortably afford infant care in California. And if you look at how many families earn that amount, it's about 10% or less. And so we're saying the majority of families cannot afford care. And that has huge impacts in terms of families' decisions for whether they have children at all, if they have a second child, whether someone works or stays home. There's also data recently saying more families are not choosing to access care and someone staying home and then foregoing income. So that increases poverty levels, right, in communities because it's a hard decision to say, I'm going to forego income because then it would all be spent on childcare. So we're really putting families in a position where it's hard to win. And those are really tough choices that they have to make. And the consequence of not providing care means more families are pushed into poverty, right? Just like we're saying, they forego income, they don't have the opportunity to earn. It affects their lifetime earnings. And so these are really important things that we have to think about. We're currently only serving about 14% of income eligible children in Head Start and early Head Start, and 5% of low moderate income infants and toddlers are receiving CCTF subsidies. Next slide. So in terms of rate reform, it's one of the big pushes at the state level. And just for context, if we stay, I think one of the most sort of bold things we've learned is that if the trends continue at the pace that we're going, it will take 60 years for ECE professionals' wages to catch up to the median of all workers. And I don't think we have that time. We will lose the sector, right? The sector will collapse if we don't keep up with the pace of costs and costs of living for those who are providing care for our children and families. They're making only about 39% of what K-8 teachers are making. And poverty rates have decreased for ECE professionals, but they're still twice other workers and nearly 4 times that of public school teachers. Next slide. This is something I've been sitting with that's been pretty heavy that we've learned recently. The rapid survey, which you may be familiar with, they survey parents and providers every month. This is what parents in California who have young children have been saying, and that in terms of emotional distress, 90% or 91% in April responded saying they are experiencing emotional distress. And we know when families, the parents experience emotional distress, that has impacts on children. And California is far above the national watermark. The high watermark for other states is 60%. And that's still too high. We don't want families with young children having 60% emotional distress. It should be far lower. And part of it is because the extra cost burden to live in California, right? That's my assumption is that I would make. But this is something, it's a 5-alarm fire for all of us to be thinking about in terms of the lack of investment in this population of children and families, and then the rising costs and crisis that are coming up, and then the toll it's going to take on generations to come. You go to the next slide. And this is from a survey of Latinx parents in, I guess, nationally, and talking about their experiences with childcare and financial stress, and just reflecting that it's impacting different communities, and that financial stress and childcare has definitely been an area that's causing additional distress for families, and that people are making choices like reducing work hours or unable to find care. The next slide. One of the things, though, we think about that's a lot of bad news, it's a lot of heavy stuff I shared, is that it doesn't have to be this way. And we really believe it's important for us, as you all do in your work, to think about, making a world where families have real choices, to build a childcare system that meets every child and family's needs. We are the leaders we've been waiting for. We are the ones who are going to make this happen. And there's no time like the present. And like Ted said, even if there's difficult financial circumstances and it looks like it's impossible, it doesn't matter. It's our responsibility to design the system that we want and then work to get it year over year in a variety of circumstances. If you go to the next slide. Some things that we think about, you can click again. One more. One more. One more. And one more. Sorry, I build in animations, then I forget. So, these are some things that we should be thinking about that are reasonable, right? Like ensure families have access to diverse, affordable childcare options, guaranteeing comprehensive programs for families with the greatest needs, building strong infrastructure, aligning standards, regulations, and funding, and maximizing existing funding. These are sort of basic things that California should be thinking about as we figure out how to improve the system and then and grow it so that it can serve more families. Next slide. One of the things our team has been doing is looking around the world and other states and saying it's common to have universal childcare programs in most countries, right? Very similar to healthcare, the United States is an outlier in not providing more comprehensive care for families starting at birth. And we thought, well, maybe we'll find like an exemplar country and be like, we should do what this little country did over here, or follow, suit to X, Y, and Z. And what we found is there's just some common practices that make sense that California should be looking towards, so we don't have to recreate the wheel, right? Things that are true in most places that provide universal childcare is that it's an entitlement and it's year-round and it's full day. If there are fees, they're capped and they are low. The focus is on early childhood development. There's intergovernmental partnerships, and there's workforce standards and compensation. There's a high level of public investment, stable financing to ensure there's supply, and it works hand in hand with paid family leave. That's a really important component. Typically, in many places, up to at least the first year, paid family leave covers infants. And that makes a lot of sense for a lot of reasons, right? Because it's a tender time, to hand your baby off to other people. It's important for families to bond and learn how to care for their infant in the first few months and year. And it just makes sense for families in terms of quality care. It is also the highest cost age group to provide care for. So there's still going to be families who need care in that first year. It just means there'll be less if we build a system that enables most families to be able to stay home. Next slide. The other thing that we found in terms of investment is that the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development, OECD, you may hear about a lot, they have a recommendation or a benchmark that you should spend about 1% of your GDP on early care and education. And so this is just showing you what countries are putting towards around that 1% mark. And you can see several countries are further ahead and spend more than that 1%. And then the United States, if you click, is down here at the bottom at 0.3%. And the first thing when my colleague brought this up to me, she was doing the deep dive research, click one more time, was I said, what's our GDP for California? And it's about $4 trillion. And so 1% of that is about $40 billion. And that would cover the cost of a universal system in California. So this is helpful to think about, resources, costs, and what we should be aiming towards. And really, again, as Ted will always say, it's about priorities, right? Next slide. You may have also heard, there's a few of our friends in other states that are moving towards universal childcare. New Mexico is the first state in the country to really make a full commitment to universal childcare. The way they've structured their expansion, it means that there's no means testing. All children birth to age 13 are eligible regardless of income or immigration. You do have to be working or in school to qualify. And then families choose their provider. Care is at no cost to families, and provider rates are statutorily required, and they raise the pay of the workers to help address some of those issues we've talked about in terms of wages. And then in New York, they also announced a joint initiative to expand childcare and early learning opportunities moving towards universal. We know New York City has more resources and has expanded more than the rest of the state. They have more money. New York City is about this, with all the boroughs, is about the size of LA County. So they have about 8 million people, and LA County maybe has 9.5 million people, but their resources are greater, I think, because of the financial district. So they have a $110 billion city budget, which is incredible, city county budget. And LA, it's like 40 billion, I think. So there's some differences in terms of resources, but they're expanding to care in New York City. And then in the state, they're doing some pilots to have true universal for a few communities, and then expanding preschool, because they haven't expanded preschool as much as the city has. So they're making concerted efforts towards building a universal system through these priorities. Next slide. So in terms of moving towards a universal approach, a lot of times people will have skepticism, right? If you can move to the next slide. Click again. In Quebec, we talked a lot about what the transition looks like and what the impact is when you move to a universal system. So in 1997, the province of Quebec made a commitment to move to universal childcare. Since that time, they've seen single parent families in public assistance drop by 64%. And it's full day, 5 days a week, and families pay less than $7 a day. And it has increased female labor force participation. If you go to the click one more. This is a statement in their declaration about why they moved to universal, which is really based on values. If you move to the next slide, or click one more. And in New Mexico, before they moved to full universal, they expanded their eligibility for childcare, and they saw a drop in poverty that was substantial. 120,000 fewer New Mexicans were living in poverty. They were one of the highest poverty rates in the country, and it was one of the reasons why they pushed for universal childcare. And then some of the other things that I pointed out earlier about their expansion are in there. Next. So one of the things a lot of times people say is, well, we can't do what they did. We can't do what New Mexico did. We can't do what Ohio did or whatever, whoever, whatever. We're not talking about copying and pasting. What we're talking about is learning and then figuring out how we can apply those lessons to what we understand to be true in California. Our state is bigger. We are very complex, but also we can do things. And so we shouldn't come from a place of no. We should come from a place of learning and figure out how we can apply the lessons that they've learned to make sense in our state. Next slide. One of the things I talk passionately about, especially for folks like you in local areas, is just the incredible importance of the work that you are doing in building local systems and how all of us together need to be rowing in the same direction towards an aligned system. Because if not, they won't sync up. And we need all of these resources to be directed in the same place so that we're building towards the same goal. And so really it's important for us to be well connected and thinking about what are ways that we align what you're doing with what's happening at the state and federal levels so you can take advantage of all of those resources that you'll be eligible for funding at the state or federal levels, and that it will strengthen the work that you're doing here to expand care for families in your community. Next slide. One of the things we think about is just, it would have been wonderful if we did this yesterday, but today's the best day to start. Just to be mindful and hopeful, we are in very trying times, but I think our friends in New Mexico and New York reminded us that there's no time like the present. And even if the present has some dark clouds around it, it is up to us to build what we want to see and care for in our communities. So we're really motivated here at Children Now to make sure that we're putting our best step forward. We think there's a lot of opportunity with the next gubernatorial administration, and we want to make sure that those next potentially 4 to 8 years are used wisely to leverage as much of our goals as possible to get us as far as we can on this issue. Next slide. One thing I want to highlight for you is we're part of another campaign. It's called a Golden State for Kids. This is a communications campaign. It's currently based in Los Angeles County, but is looking to expand in the next year. And this is really to help push the public urgency around this issue so that when we have a unified ask at the state level, that people will be ready to mobilize, right? And that people have the right talking points and framing that is effective for voters to be able to be aligned and move in this direction. If you go to the next slide, I encourage you, click one more. If you go to the social media for the campaign, you can go to the Instagram or Facebook for a Golden State for Kids. They've just done a phenomenal job of highlighting what's good and strong about the childcare sector. For example, we have a story here for Miss Judith. She's a provider in South LA, and they went to her house where she provides care. And from 6 a.m. to 6 p.m., she showed us what she does with the kids, how she welcomes the families, how she prepares, what they do throughout the day, her approach to being a care provider. And it has over 6 million hits. A lot of the social media videos have gotten a lot of resonance, and people have appreciated how affirming it is of the strengths we have to build from. Because a lot of times people hear so much negativity around childcare, they forget we have such wonderful strengths in our communities and fantastic providers, really just doing tremendous jobs under the worst conditions. So I really want to lift that up. And if you're interested in replicating those kinds of things in your county, we'd love to talk to you about expanding. If you go to the next slide. One of the things that we recently produced is something we call a Golden State for Care. And part of this is just creating a framework that all of us working in this area can use to advance and align our work in childcare. And like I talked about with that mismatched bridge, we're really encouraging people to both think about how we align but identify opportunities in these areas so that we can make childcare stronger. And there's plenty we can do both now in the short term as well as the long term. If you go to the next slide. So there's basically 4 S's if you go to the Golden State for Care part of the website. And the first S is just supply. We want to create access for every family so that every family can afford care, starting with those facing the greatest barriers. So in your community, what are ways that you can support increasing access? There's a variety of strategies different communities have used. You can see in San Francisco, they've increased subsidies for families up to, I think, 300 something percent of their local SMI. Other communities are raising tax initiatives, or people are using existing resources to better support access in their communities. Some city leaders are looking at uh, regulations and things that they can work with the community on. And I'll talk about a little bit as well. Next slide. The second S is support, ensuring that we have a sustainable provider workforce and that childcare is a valued and viable profession is just fundamental to making sure we have not only support the existing field, but a growing one sector so that we can bring more folks into this work. Next slide. The third S is sustain. What are sustainable sources of funding? Dedicated and sustainable funding streams for 0 to 3, both at the local, state, and federal levels. Just thinking about all the ways that we can combine funding. There's some creative work people have done with leveraging like Department of Labor dollars to get apprenticeships in place. There's cities and counties leveraging other kinds of resources and dollars to help with facilities and other capacity. So not just looking at the typical streams, but all the different opportunities available to bring resources to this sector. Next slide. The last S is just simplify. And this is actually an area that people have taken really amazing creative actions. The city of LA worked with the National League of Cities, and they had a whole process where they worked with childcare providers and they went through the licensing or local regulations and building code process with city departments to figure out how they can streamline the fees, streamline the number of documents and applications they had to go through to make it easier for providers in their community. And it was a really fruitful and wonderful experience for them. And we encourage everyone to think about ways that I always say you have folks with local authority and discretion. How can they use it to improve and strengthen the system, right? And streamlining is something you can do in a tough fiscal environment. Next slide. That's it. That was a lot. I went through them really quickly. I'm always happy to walk through them more slowly or share more examples with you. But given that you guys are such outstanding champions and leaders in early education and childcare, I just wanted to make sure you had a taste of the types of data and information that Children Now has access to, and then figure out ways that we can collaborate to support your work locally and connect it to the work we're doing at the state and federal levels. That's it for me. I don't know if you guys have questions or what the time's like, but
We still have plenty of time, so if people have some questions, feel free to ask them in the chat or come off mute and ask them directly. Um, yeah, so if no one has any questions, I would really like to thank Stacy and Ted. Such a wonderful presentation. Thank you guys for taking the time to come show us here at the Isabella Project. So, um, and if, but did anyone?
Aiden.
Hey,
I had a couple of questions in the chat, and I too want to thank Ted and Stacy for all your great work and all the great information in the PowerPoint slide deck. I had a couple of questions. On one of the slides, there was a reference to childcare deserts, and I was just curious for the benefit of the group, uh, what criteria or threshold level is to designate a geographic area as a childcare desert?
So the Center for American Progress put out a report on childcare deserts, and then the definition they use is that licensed supply in a census tract with at least 30 children or age 5 or younger had no licensed childcare providers or a ratio of more than 3 children under age 5 for the licensed slot.
Okay, thank you very much. And then my second question was related to the slide on the 1% of GDP. What it would, that 41 billion, does that also include any projected increases to raise the with the rate reform for childcare providers above the RMR, the current RMR?
Yeah, so I think if we think about all the things we need to do to sustain and support the existing system and then move to expansion, it's a moving target. So it's not like that 41 billion was calculated to exactly measure those kinds of changes. But you can imagine over time, there's different priorities that happen. So we're not going to open up capacity tomorrow to, give everyone a slot. You're going to have to do things like invest in the workforce, build infrastructure, do X, Y, and Z. So that same amount of money is going to be spent differently over time. Does that make sense?
Yes, it does. Thank you.
Yeah.
And then briefly, I know the 26, 27 is pending a governor's approval for the coming fiscal year. Anything that you want to share with us in respects to the pending budget that we should be aware of and or advocate for as it relates to
Um,
your investments?
yeah, I would say the advocacy window's probably closed because I think they're about to dry the ink on whatever they're publishing if they haven't published it yet. Um, but it's we all know it's a horrible climate. HR1 is doing severe damage, and we haven't seen the worst of it yet. There were some areas that the legislator pushed for to support childcare. And again, childcare, because we've been good advocates as a community and that we've been strong in asking for the things that we've needed, we're not getting cut. So that's really important. And there are pushes from the legislature to support continued expansion, albeit small, right? Even the numbers they're talking about, our peers in LA County have a waiting list that's bigger than the amount that would be added to the system. So not that I'm not grateful, but just being, thinking about relatively, that's why we are thinking so much about the big picture and systemic reforms, because this year to year advocacy is not working for us, right? We need to support our legislative leaders and the next governor to make smarter, more systemic changes that are more deeply meaningful, because we're not getting there year by year. It's not helping.
And I'll just
And
say just two other things, just on a bright note, and we have a pretty good sense of what's going to be in the budget. And sort of Stacey's indicating it's not great, but it's not bad. But I will say, just if you look at the budget the last few years, and I've been doing this long enough that I can take sort of a historical view over the last 30 years, we kids are doing better in the budget over the last few years than they have in a long, long, long time, if ever. I don't know what it was like further long ago. But the last few years, they really have. And I think that, first of all, we obviously have to thank the governor and legislators, but I also think we have to thank ourselves. All of us, we've really been pushing harder and saying, come on, you can't just say kids. You've got to really mean it when the budget. And if you compare, like, if you go way back to the Great Recession, what was that, 2008, 2012, kids, childcare, other kids programs got the biggest hit. And so now we're in the position when there's cuts, childcare and kids don't get the biggest hits, and when there's more money, we're getting more. So I don't want us to take that and say, "Oh, good, we're doing better." Like Stacey said, we got to keep pushing at that every year. But we are overall doing better from a state budget perspective. The one other thing I just wanted to highlight, the very exciting term governance. But I want to mention that for two reasons. One, because of something that hopefully is going to happen in the next couple of days, but then focus on early childhood. We've been pushing very hard in the children's movement, delivered a letter with over 950 organizations for education governance reform. And just to simplify that, just about every other state, the governor's on the hook for education. And you're like, well, isn't our governor on the hook for education? Not really. It's very complicated. The state superintendent runs the Department of Education. I know during COVID, it was so confusing who was calling the shots. School leaders throughout the state will tell you it's a real problem, because of it just where's actually the authority. So this reform, we'd keep the state superintendent. They would be a very important advocate for education. They'd actually now be serving on the CSU, UC, and community college boards to help connect with higher ed. But the control of the Department of Ed would come under the governor and an appointed commissioner, which is how other states do it, and really will help education in terms of implementation and authority. So it sounds sort of like a wonky change, and it's not a panacea. It's by itself, but it will really help. And I mention that because it will help early childhood, because as you know, TK, some programs are under CDE, some are under HS. This will make clear the governor has to make sure it's all working and connected. And then assuming this goes through, there's going to be a focus on early childhood governance, and really where you're the expert, because I know at the local level, it's like, whoa, who's getting the money? Where's it coming from? How is it being distributed? And so I think there's going to be an effort to see how the state can be helpful with some reforms in early childhood governance. So more to come on that, but this has to get through first, and we'll find out in the next few days.
Thank you, Ted. And also, I think to put in perspective, historically, Head Start and early Head Start at the federal level has received significant increases, not major cuts, as well over its 61-year history. So it's always a threat, and we have to advocate for that. But historically, those programs have proven to be valuable in terms of the ECE system. And then also with regards to what you just shared with us, I know that early childhood education funding years ago was under Prop 98 in terms of the funding source, and now it's under the general fund. Will there be any consideration about the funding stream mechanism as part of this reform that you just mentioned to us in terms of governance?
And Children Now takes a slightly different take on this than some others in the early childhood field, although we're all together, don't worry. But I think what sometimes gets confusing is people say, oh, well, K through 12, now K through 12 has all this money. It's under Prop 98. We got to get childcare under there. We got to put more stuff under there. I think we make a big mistake when we pit kids program versus kids program. I mean, we all know, visit a local school, and maybe you're really lucking out, but I would guess you'd say, wow, it should be great if that local school had a school nurse and some more support on campus, and more staff. We rank at the bottom of the country staff. So our concern with shifting more under Prop 98 is what that means is less for, K through 12. It's really important as kids advocates not to get caught in this 98 versus non-98 debate, because in the non-98 section, that's corrections, that's law enforcement, that's general government. That's a lot of areas where we rank at the very top of the country. And, we try to avoid saying we'll cut there, but I'll say this, what we do say is if you have an available dollar, put it into childcare. And, if state government has to hold the line or cut anywhere, it should be a non-kid program. So we try to stay away from this 98, non-98 thing, because what it ends up doing is pitting early childhood versus K-12, as opposed to why do we rank even with us closing a few prisons, we still rank number one per capita in corrections. So we should be looking at the other non-98 areas, saying hold the line on that spending, increase childcare.
That's really a helpful lesson learned and a wisdom nugget for us as we do our advocacy, because that often comes up. And so thank you for that. That's very, very helpful.
When also in terms of our advocacy is to say, you as the governor with your areas of executive and administrative authority, what would make the most sense to create sustainable funding and works best for children and families, right? Like our system is incoherent. It's complicated for providers and children and families to navigate. So they really have to look at a variety of options for refining, streamlining, and collapsing some requirements, eligibility areas, and things. And so we're talking with a lot of our childcare partners around what are things we can do in the next year or two that would streamline the system that currently exists, right? Like with a tough fiscal environment, this is our opportunity, and what I say, to ready the system to grow, right? If we got $10 billion tomorrow and they said, give everyone or as many people as possible childcare, it would get stuck in a bunch of clogged pipes, right? We know it's too hard to get the money out. So let's fix those right now so that we can then execute more effectively when we have the resources we want and know we need. So that's on us. We can do that right now. So if you can think about what's happening in your community, advocate with your associations and statewide members to say, let's take advantage of this window. And I know it would make sense if we did X, Y, and Z. Let's do that. So we're starting to have more conversations with partners at different departments about that, and with our childcare provider friends, and say, let's just make a list and say, this doesn't make sense. We don't need to do X, Y, and Z, and then propose those things to happen in the next year or two.
Again, thank you for your presentation today. It was very, very, very helpful. Thank you.
Yeah, Aiden, I'd like to offer an observation and an appreciation to Children Now program. Ted Lampert and Stacy, excellent presentation for us. Here with the Isabella project, we're working in three areas within our roadmap. The first was systems, approaching the area of systems, then families, and then workforce. So those are the three challenges that we have here locally, and you're kind of referred to them all in your excellent presentation. The one thing that we don't have here with the Isabella project in Ventura County is our capacity to develop the research materials that you are providing on a regular basis to all of us that are interested in early childhood education and early care, because I really liked the slide where the tree slide where of course, the earliest intervention is the best intervention, correct? So all of those things that happen to impact children is something that the children's movement has worked on for years, and we appreciate the connection that we have with you. I appreciate the newsletters that you send out, the reports. In particular, I will appreciated the interviews that you did with the candidates for governor, which really focused on the real issues related to children and families versus just other debates that I saw that was more about money in general and all of that, without really considering that our youngest residents in the community really represent the future, our future. And that's not just a cliche, that's a reality. So anyway, I appreciate the time that you took to provide that information for us. I echo Jack Josa's comments about the excellence and information that you provided. So thank you once again, and we'll continue to work together.
And please use our work. Take, copy, paste, steal it. We want you to use it so that you can advance your advocacy that you're doing here.
All right. Well, if that concludes all the questions and comments, I'd like to again thank you guys for coming, for everyone for attending from the Isabella Project, and I hope you have a wonderful day.
Thank you so much. Really appreciate it.
Bye, everyone.